Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling something really significant. It's about that confrontation in Chicago back in 2025. The aggressive federal operations. It went way beyond just standard immigration stuff. It really hit at the core of, well, federal power inside a major American city.
Yeah, it was a major flashpoint.
This wasn't just another enforcement action. It felt different. A real collision between federal aims and local policy. Okay, let's unpack this.
Definitely.
Our mission for you, the listener, is pretty clear. We need to dig into the specifics. What actually happened during those raids? Which agencies were involved? Because it wasn't just ICE.
Not at all.
And we need to understand that central conflict, Chicago, a sanctuary city, versus this really forceful federal push. Then there's the resident reaction, which was huge, and what this all means down the line for other big cities, especially Democratic ones, and particularly for Black communities caught in the middle.
And it's important to set the stage correctly. What happened in Chicago? It wasn't random. It felt like a deliberate escalation of interior enforcement. Very high profile, very high impact.
Designed to challenge those local sanctuary policies.
Exactly. By ramping up the force, the visibility, they basically guaranteed future confrontations. This wasn't just a paperwork dispute. It was a fight over who controls safety on the streets within city limits.
Okay, let's start with Section 1 then. The facts on the ground. What actually happened? Because the reports paint a picture of something pretty intense.
They do.
We're talking about escalated federal ops in neighborhoods like South Shore. And the tactics, I mean, they sound alarming. Reports of door-kicking entries.
Yes, aggressive entries were widely reported.
And even chemical agents being used in some situations. And maybe most critically, detentions that apparently swept up U.S. citizens along with non-citizens.
That's a crucial point. When enforcement gets that broad, the risk to everyone's civil liberties just shoots way up.
And it wasn't just confined to those early morning raids, was it? Things spilled out.
Oh, absolutely. It boiled over dramatically in Brighton Park. There was this major street confrontation, intense protests. It ended with vehicles ramming federal ICE vehicles.
Wow.
And then Border Patrol agents shot an armed woman involved in that incident. That was the crisis point. It showed these weren't just administrative arrests anymore. Things had escalated significantly.
And that specific confrontation, the Brighton Park incident, that seems to have been used as the justification for the federal government to then double down, right?
Right.
To escalate even further.
It absolutely was. After Brighton Park, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, surged in more personnel. And significantly, they brought in units you don't normally see doing this kind of work.
Like who?
Sources mentioned tactical units, specifically BORTAC. Now, for you listening, it's important we clarify what that means. BORTAC is the Border Patrol Tactical Unit.
Border Patrol's tactical unit.
Right. Their main job is high-risk border operations, hostage situations, drug interdiction, usually out in remote, dangerous border zones.
So bringing a unit like BORTAC into a dense civilian city like Chicago, that sends a pretty strong message. It feels almost like a militarization of immigration enforcement inside the country.
Precisely. It signals a deliberate choice to escalate force. It's a very different kind of presence than, say, a standard ICE civil arrest team.
Okay, so let's map out the agencies again. You've got DHS at the top directing things.
Right.
Then ICE, which usually handles the civil immigration arrests and raids.
Correct.
But then you also had CBP, Customs and Border Protection, and specifically Border Patrol, including BORTAC, involved in tactical actions and these neighborhood sweeps.
And that's what gave these operations that sort of military feel and really amplified the fear in the community.
And while all this federal power is surging into the city, you have the local Chicago police, CPD, basically stuck. They were under that city executive order from late August.
To non-assistance order.
Yeah, telling them explicitly not to help with civil immigration enforcement.
And that's where the clash, that jurisdictional collision, really became physical, CPD is ordered to stand down from helping ICE on civil matters. That's the essence of Chicago's sanctuary policy.
So when federal agents, especially tactical teams, are operating on their own,
it creates chaos, command confusion, local resentment, and we saw the political fallout too. Remember the talk about federalizing the National Guard or deploying them?
Yeah, Governor Pritzker and Mayor Johnson pushed back hard on that.
They did. Successfully resisted it. They argued it was serious federal overreach into state authority.
That resistance and the sheer aggressiveness of the federal approach really sets up our next section. Section 2, the policy drivers. Why Chicago? Why this intense focus?
Well, it was definitely strategic. It came straight from the top, from the administration's policy priorities at the time.
Which favored?
High visibility interior enforcement, especially targeting places like Chicago that actively resisted federal immigration mandates, the sanctuary jurisdictions. The goal seemed to be to try and break that model.
So a direct challenge.
Absolutely. The sources frame it clearly as a jurisdictional collision. Chicago doubled down on its non-cooperation, almost daring a response, and the federal government responded by escalating the force, the profile of the deployments. It wasn't subtle.
Now we have to look at how these tactics were framed, impartially. How did the administration justify using units like BORTAC in city neighborhoods?
Well, publicly and internally, supporters framed these operations primarily as being about crime, about tackling gangs, making communities safer by removing dangerous individuals. That was the justification.
Okay, that's one side. What was the counter-argument?
Critics looked at the high-profile nature, the use of tactical teams, and basically said, this looks like political theater.
Meaning?
Meaning the main goal wasn't really about local crime reduction. That's usually CPD's job, right? The real objective, critics argued, was projecting federal power, scaring potential migrants, and putting intense political heat on the Democratic city leadership.
So the means didn't quite match the stated ends, according to critics. If it was just about crime, they'd use different units.
That's the argument. They likely would have relied more on ICE's criminal investigation units, HSI, not Border Patrol's tactical teams whose whole purpose is different, geographically and operationally.
Okay. Regardless of the motive, though, the impact on residents was immediate.
And sounds traumatic.
Oh, profound is the word. And the community reaction was incredibly fast. At first, yes, there was widespread fear. You heard stories of these terrifying home entries, neighborhood sweeps.
Understandable.
But that fear very quickly turned into mobilization. People started organizing legal aid almost instantly. There were massive Know Your Rights campaigns popping up, big street protests demanding protection.
Fear, then action.
Yes. But the tension wasn't only between residents and federal agents. It got complicated with local police, too. There were even allegations in at least one suburb that CPD actually limited assistance to federal agents who got trapped or surrounded during protests.
Really? That would certainly escalate things. Oh, it definitely inflamed the already tense dynamic between federal and local law enforcement. That kind of non-cooperation, even alleged, just pours fuel on the fire.
That local pushback, that friction, really sets the stage for thinking about the future. Let's move to Section 3. And here's where it gets really interesting. Is this kind of aggressive, unilateral federal action in a sanctuary city like Chicago a sustainable model? Or was this a one-off?
Given the underlying conflict hasn't gone away, you still have this sustained federal push for interior enforcement versus Chicago's very clear, legally backed non-cooperation.
The basic ingredients are still there.
Exactly. So the short answer is likely yes, we probably will see versions of this again, unless Congress steps in or the courts draw some really firm lines. The potential for conflict is still very much alive.
Which suggests we're looking at ongoing, what do you call it, legal trench warfare in these Democratic-led cities. What does that actually look like on the ground?
Well, you can expect legal fights on a couple of main fronts. First, lawsuits challenging the enforcement actions themselves, probably based on the Fourth Amendment.
Due process illegal searches.
Right. Did agents have proper probable cause, especially if they were detaining citizens? Were the warrants valid? That sort of thing. Second, you'll see broader lawsuits challenging federal overreach itself. Can the federal government conduct these huge operations deep inside a state without any real local coordination or consent?
And cities won't just wait to react legally, right? They'll prepare defensively.
Absolutely not. They'll likely preemptively issue more city executive orders, EOs, trying to limit any local resource cooperation with federal immigration agents. And they'll pour resources into building up these rapid response legal defense networks to protect residents the moment something happens.
This constant conflict, this legal back and forth, it must put a huge strain on public safety overall.
Undeniably, when you have federal teams doing one thing and local police under orders to do something else or nothing at all, it totally messes up incident command in a crisis.
But the deeper damage, it's trust, isn't it?
That's the biggest long-term cost, I think. This kind of aggressive federal presence just devastates trust in institutions, especially in neighborhoods that already feel over-policed or profiled.
if the agencies supposed to protect you are the ones doing door-kicking raids.
Exactly. Community trust just evaporates, and that has real policy consequences. You'll probably see cities become even more reluctant to share data with federal agencies, maybe pull out of joint task forces altogether.
And invest more in their own services instead,
Yeah.
like legal aid for immigrants.
Right. Counterintuitively, the federal pressure might lead cities to double down on supporting immigrant communities. Of course, Washington can push back financially.
Threatening federal funding is the classic countermove.
It is. Threaten funds or just bypass the city entirely with more unilateral deployments. Which, of course, just starts the conflict cycle all over again. The courts and the budget become the main battlegrounds.
Let's shift focus slightly here to Section 4, because this isn't just an abstract legal fight. We need to talk about the impact on Black communities in Chicago, which were often right in the middle of these operations.
Yes, this is a critical intersection to analyze. Black communities in cities like Chicago, they're living with this complex reality. Decades of history with over-policing, current worries about neighborhood safety.
And now this new layer of aggressive, sometimes militarized immigration enforcement happening right there.
Exactly. They're at the crossroads. These neighborhoods might be used to a heavy police presence, but now they're dealing with federal agents driven by different policies, but whose tactics can feel disturbingly familiar.
So how does this federal surge play into, or maybe worsen, existing issues of community trust with law enforcement in Chicago?
Well, when you have federal actions involving aggressive raids, alleged profiling of non-white residents, it resonates deeply in communities that already have, let's say, strained relationships with police.
It confirms existing fears, maybe.
It can certainly feel that way. It adds another layer of surveillance, another potential threat in places where people are already wary. It can even make community organizing harder if residents start fearing that any interaction with authority, local or federal, could lead to trouble for them or their neighbors.
That's incredibly complex. So, given that, what kinds of community responses or organizing efforts started to emerge specifically to deal with this?
What's been really interesting and frankly powerful is the focus on coalition building.
Between who?
We started seeing really strong partnerships form between established Black-led civil rights groups and the newer immigrant rights organizations.
Finding common ground.
Absolutely. Their shared interest is clear.
Yeah.
Protecting civil liberties against what they see as overreaching law enforcement, regardless of agency. So they work together on things like court-watching programs, running de-escalation trainings, setting up community alert networks.
And how do these coalitions try to exert political influence?
They focus pressure locally, pushing city and state officials to draw really clear, legally sound lines about any future federal joint ops, demanding much more transparency and oversight when federal agents are operating in the city. They're trying to shape the local rules of engagement.
Ultimately, though, the goal has to be about community stability and safety in the broader sense, right? Not just reacting to raids.
Yes, exactly. The more forward-looking groups are trying to shift the conversation. They're pushing for policies that build economic and neighborhood stability, things like affordable housing, job programs, better mental health support.
The idea being that stronger communities are less likely to be seen as needing these kinds of militarized solutions.
Precisely. Reduce the conditions that give political cover for heavy-handed enforcement. And on a very practical level, it means doubling down on know your rights education for everybody, citizens, legal residents, undocumented folks, and stressing how crucial it is to document everything during an encounter.
Like badge numbers, times, locations.
All of it. Documentation is power in these situations.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. What does this all mean? The Chicago 2025 incident. It really wasn't just about immigration enforcement in the usual sense. It felt like a major test case.
It really did.
About defining the limits of federal power inside city borders, and about the incredible strain that puts on civil liberties, on community trust, things that are already fragile in many places.
And because this conflict seems likely to continue, that strain means practical knowledge is just vital. We really need to highlight that core know your rights advice again, straight from the sources we looked at.
Go ahead.
Okay. If you're ever confronted by civil immigration agents, first, always ask clearly, am I free to leave? Second, do not consent to any searches of yourself or your property. Third, state clearly that you want a lawyer.
And crucially, the door thing.
Yes, the door. Never, ever open your door to civil ICE agents just because they knock, not unless they slide a warrant under the door that has been signed by an actual judge.
That distinction is so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
The difference between an ICE administrative warrant and a judge-signed judicial warrant.
It's fundamental. It's your Fourth Amendment protection right there. An administrative warrant is basically an internal ICE document. It doesn't give them the legal right to enter your home without your permission.
Only a judge-signed warrant based on probable cause reviewed by a court gives them that authority.
Exactly. Knowing that difference and acting on it is probably the single most important protection people have in these encounters.
So looking ahead, the real tension to watch isn't just, how many raids happen next month. It's the legal battleground, tracking those court cases, challenging tactics, like using BORTAC for civil arrests, seeing if courts issue injunctions, and watching how strictly cities enforce their own executive orders limiting local police help.
That's where the real constraints might come from. The courts ultimately might be the only truly effective check on how fast and how hard these federal-local confrontations can escalate. That legal arena is definitely the space to watch.